Welcome to the Crunch McDabbles Show. I'm your host, Crunch McDabbles. This is the only show where we break down all of your favorite Pathfinder Second Edition abilities and feats so you can build the best characters possible. Because let's face it, Golarion is a dangerous place full of wanton evil.
There's evil afoot.
So let's make sure you are prepared. Today's show, point blank shot and bow builds. Okay, point blank shot. Well, the first thing we see here with this feat is there are a couple of traits. The first trait is open. Open traits mean you have to use this feat at the beginning of your turn before you attack. And this is fine, we don't mind this. Second, this feat has the stance trait. This means it takes one action to get into point blank shot mode. So we have to give up an action to use this feat. It's only one time for the whole combat at the beginning of your turn, but it's still an action you have to give up to use the feat. So what does this feat do? The flavor text says you take aim to pick off nearby enemies quickly. Well, that sounds good. Of course we want to pick off nearby enemies quickly, but what does this mean in game terms? It says when using a ranged volley weapon when in this stance, you don't take the penalty from attack rolls from the volley trait. So what does this mean? Basically, there's one weapon in the game that has the volley trait, that being longbows, both regular longbows and composite longbows. Now the volley trait has a distance associated with it, and when attacking monsters within that distance, you take a -2 penalty on attacks. That's harsh. Basically, using your longbow or composite longbow against targets within 30 feet, you would have a -2 penalty on attack rolls, and this feat gets rid of that penalty. However, point blank shot also has another feature. It says when using a ranged weapon that doesn't have the volley trait, so that would be all other ranged weapons besides longbows, you gain a +2 circumstance bonus to damage rolls on attacks to targets within your first range increment. So okay, now my interest is peaked, P-I-Q-U-E-D, because I like more damage. So I'm interested in what this extra damage means. So we have two factors to consider here with regard to damage and our ranged builds. Number one, we have to decide what ranged weapon we're going to use. We have a lot to choose from, and each weapon has different features. Some do more base damage, some have extra features like deadly, and they all have different reload rates. But B, we also have to consider how much damage we're losing by spending that one action to get into point blank shot. So basically we want to know what weapon works the best with point blank shot and when to use it. So you ready to look at some graphs? So let's start at the beginning. Let's say we're using a longbow and our targets are greater than 30 feet away. And we're using our standard build, our first level fighter with an 18 dexterity, so +4 to hit, with +5 from training, so +9 to hit total, versus an armor class of 18. Also, remember, longbows are deadly D10, so we're adding in that extra damage on criticals. On one attack, we deal 3.7 average damage. A second attack adds in, at -5 adds in 2.1 more damage for a total of 5.8. And a third attack at -10 adds in just one more average damage, bringing the total for the round up to 6.8. That's not that good, but it gets worse. If those targets happen to be within the 30-foot range, because this is a volley weapon, our attacks are made at -2, and our damage drops to 2.8 on the first attack, 1.6 on the second attack for 4.4 total, and the third attack it adds in just another 0.2 average damage for a total of 4.6 average damage for the round. That's really low. And adding in 0.2 extra damage, that's really close to 0, meaning we do the same amount of damage whether you use that third attack or not. So that's kind of sad. And on this concept, if we had the feat point blank shot and we used it, our damage goes back to the original. We don't gain any damage, we just avoid losing it because we don't take that -2 penalty for using a volley weapon. So basically, our damage goes back to the same as if we were attacking monsters from 30 feet away or greater, in which we said that damage wasn't that good. Okay, so now let's compare non-volley weapons with point blank shot. So let's say a short bow. Now with all these non-volley weapons, we're getting more damage, +2 damage on each hit to targets within the first range increment. And a range increment on a short bow is 60 feet, so it's pretty reasonable to assume that all your targets are going to be within that range. So let's see how this affects our damage. To begin with, let's say we are already in point blank shot stance and using a short bow. On the first attack, we kick in at 4.4 average damage. That's more than the longbow already. A second attack adds in 2.5 more damage, bringing the total up to 6.9, and the third attack adds in just 1.1 more damage, but that brings the total up to 8 average damage for the full round. So in short, the short bow with point blank shot beats the longbow with or without point blank shot. But this leaves us with one burning question. If I'm giving up one action to get into point blank shot, how much damage am I actually giving up? In other words, is it worth it for the extra damage I'm gaining to give up one attack action? Basically, the question is this: how many rounds do I have to remain in point blank shot before I do enough extra damage to justify giving up the one extra action to get into point blank shot? And the answer is 0. 0 rounds. Let's look at it. So here is a short bow damage without point blank shot. One attack is 3 average damage, 2 attacks is 4.7 average damage, and 3 attacks is 5.5 average damage. So with point blank shot, I end up giving up that first attack because I'm spending that action getting into point blank shot, so my damage is 0. So that's kind of a rough start. But now with that extra damage, my first attack is 4.4 average damage, so that's almost as much as the first 2 attacks without point blank shot. And when I make that second attack, the 2 attacks is 6.9 average damage, and that flat out beats 3 attacks without point blank shot. So the rule of thumb is if you have point blank shot, it's always worth it to use that action right away to get into the stance. The reason is you're giving up that third attack, which isn't much damage. You're not giving up the first attack, your good damage. You're just giving up that lowly third attack. So definitely use point blank shot right away. The extra damage is worth it. Now let's compare some other weapons with point blank shot. Here is the short bow with point blank shot. We already saw that one. It does 8 damage per round average. Now, how about a heavy crossbow? It looks like a great weapon. It has a D10 of damage instead of the D6 from the short bow, but it doesn't have the deadly trait. And it also requires 2 actions to reload, so you're spending your whole life reloading that thing. And so you're only getting 1 shot per round. And the average damage on that 1 shot, even with point blank shot, is only 5.3 per round. So the heavy crossbow, not as good as a short bow. How about the halfling sling staff? It does a D10 of damage like the heavy crossbow, but it has a reload of only 1, not 2. So on 1 round, you're doing a load, fire, load, so you're getting only 1 shot. And then the next round, you do a fire, load, fire, so you would get 2 shots. So on the 1 round with the fire, load, fire, with point blank shot, you would get 8.3 average damage per round, which is pretty nice. That's just above the short bow. But on the other round, when you're doing the load, fire, load, you only do 5.3 damage, which is less. So I guess if you average the 2 rounds out, it would be 6.8 average damage for the round, which is pretty good. Plus it's a propulsive weapon, so you will be adding in half your strength on top of that damage. So it's a decent ranged option, so you can break out your halfling fighter sling builds. They'd be pretty good. Finally, the Daikyu bow. It doesn't have the deadly trait, which is bad, but it also doesn't have the volley trait, so you would be getting a D8 ranged weapon, which could get the benefit of the +2 damage from point blank shot without any reload, so you could get 3 shots per round. Unfortunately, it doesn't have the deadly trait, so the end result is you end up with 4.6, 2.6, and 1 for your 3 attacks with an 8.2 average damage per round. Still right around the short bow, but it does have this big drawback of being an uncommon and an advanced weapon, so it's not really a great option, especially not for low levels. So it looks like the short bow is really king for ranged weapons, but how do we kick our ranged build into overdrive? Obviously we're going to take point blank shot if we're a ranged build, but if we're using a composite short bow which has the propulsive trait, we can add in even more damage by adding in half our strength. So this brings us to the burning question of, do we go for dex or do we go for flex in our composite short bow build? Or better, how much flex do we want with our dex? The fighter allows us to choose whether we want +2 in strength or dex, so we can either have an 18 strength or an 18 dex on our final stats. If we have an 18 dex, we're getting that +4 to hit, but how much does that leave for us to put into our strength to add in damage? We have to find just the right balance between our 2 hit and our added damage from strength. So our ability choices look something like this. We could have an 18 dex with the 14 strength. That would give us +4 to hit and +1 to damage. Or we could try something like this. We could do a 16 dex with an 18 strength. That would give us only a +3 to hit, but a nice +2 to damage. Which do you think is better? Let's have a look. Here is a normal short bow damage with an 18 dexterity and no bonus from strength, either because you don't have a composite short bow or because you don't have any strength. And here's the damage if you add in the +2 damage from point blank shot and you're attacking targets within 60 feet. So that's not bad damage right there, that's pretty good. But now if we instead go with the 16 dexterity and an 18 strength, on the first attack we deal 4.8 damage. That's actually a little better. And on 2 attacks we deal 7.7 damage. And with 3 attacks, that 1 less to hit really kills us, and we only add in 0.4 extra damage for a total of 8.1. It's still better than the 18 dex no strength, but not that much better. Now, here is the sweet spot. If we keep our dex at 18 and our strength at 14, or you could make your strength 16, which would allow you to move it up to 18 at 5th level when you get your ability boost. You get even more damage than at 5th level. But with the 14 strength minimum, you would get that 1 extra point of damage per hit from your propulsive weapon and keep your 2 hit at +4 from having 18 dex. That gives you 5.1 average damage on the first hit. That's nice. The second attack at -5 adds in 2.9 more damage. That's still pretty nice for a total of 8 average damage. And the third attack at -10 adds in 1.3 more damage for a total of 9.3 average damage. 9.3 average damage per round will allow you to kill many things. Plus you can still just stand back and pick off targets. In other words, you don't have to move around the way a melee fighter does. And you're still doing pretty much the same damage or a little better damage than just a longsword fighter. So the summation of all of this, grab a composite short bow. They are pretty cheap or reasonably priced. Buy a bunch of arrows. You don't want to forget your arrows. Then take the point blank shot feat. That's a good feat. And put your dex at 18 and put your strength at 14 or 16 if you're feeling saucy. And you'll be ready to Legolas some bad actors out on the battlefield. So that's it. That's our exhaustive look at point blank shot and your bow build. Now you have the real knowledge to face off against the hordes of evil in an imaginary world. Galarian is counting on you.